Imagine the vacation of nightmares.
We begin our report with the kidnapping of 4 Americans in Mexico.
They were visiting for the day, and a Mexican cartel sent a truly disturbing message to the U.S. and anyone else looking to visit. This is a harrowing tale of a recent trip south of the border. Medical tourism. Our story starts with something known as medical tourism. Latavia Washington McGee is from Lake City, South Carolina, and earlier this year she wanted to get a tummy tuck. If she wanted to get this done at a clinic in her home state, this would set her back somewhere between $7,000 to $9,000. However, if she got this done in Mexico, this would range from $2,500 to $4,500. So it seemed like a no-brainer to get this done in Mexico. However, McGee was far from naive about the many concerns people have when visiting Mexico. She was not staying there for long, and she planned to simply travel to the border city of Matamoros in Mexico, have the surgery done, and get straight out. She would travel down that morning, and before night falls, she would be back safe again on American soil. Latavia also wanted to avoid traveling on her own, especially as she was going under the knife. So she brought along 4 other friends and turned it into a fun road trip instead. A police report revealed the 5 friends had driven a rented minivan from South Carolina on Thursday to the southern tip of Texas. One of the people on this trip was a friend named Zindel Brown. Zindel's sister Zelena spoke to him on the phone halfway through the trip and told news outlets about their conversation. I texted him. I said, "Where you at?" And I was like, "What you doing?" And he said, "Riding. I'm in Mississippi." And I called because I needed to see this for sure. So we video chatted with each other. He was talking to me. He talked to my baby, and he said, "We're about to get back on the road. I will talk to you later." And I said, "Okay, just let me know your destination," because after he said they were going to Mexico, and of course Americans go to Mexico all the time, but Zelena was obviously still worried about her brother. I was just like, "Be careful, be careful." And then when I hung up with him, I sent him some text messages, letting him know to be careful. I said, "If y'all make it into Mexico, just be very careful. Be aware of your surroundings." Zelena went even as far as to advise him if he got into any danger. "If you run into any cartel roadblocks or anything, don't fight. Don't resist whatever they tell you to do. All of you, all do it. Because at least you have a chance if you do what they ask you to do." Little did Zendel know, her sister's warning would come back to haunt him. South of the border. Once they reached Brownsville, Texas on their itinerary, it was now time to make a quick trip south of the border to Matamoros in Tamaulipas for Latavia's surgery. Accompanying Latavia was her friends Eric and Zindel, as well as Latavia's cousin Shade Woodard. And once the surgery was done, they would head straight back up. Also traveling with the group was Latavia's best friend Cheryl. When the reached Texas, she realized that she had no ID and was turned down at the border. So she decided that while they got the surgery done in Mexico, she would stay at the motel in Texas. The other 3 friends were expected to drop off Latavia at the doctor's office and come straight back up to the hotel. On that fateful morning, they were running late for Latavia's surgery, so they needed to get a move on. But as American tourists, they did not know their way around and got a little lost. So they drove down some side roads and struggled to get back to the main road. And Zendel was the first person to realize that things weren't quite right. While sitting in the back seat, he saw a car nearby with someone holding a gun, but he knew straight away that they shouldn't panic. They continued to drive through these roads, hoping to get back onto a main street. By 11 a.m., a gray Volkswagen Jetta was following them. The Americans drove and drove, quietly praying that they would get back onto the main road. By 11:45 a.m., they had reached the main road. But once they reached this road, their lives changed forever. The shooting started. The cartel ascents bullets were hitting the car, causing Shahid and Zendel to get out of the car and start running. This move, tragically, turned out to be the wrong one, and they were quickly gunned down. After these shots, someone started to beat the car window with a gun. This caused Eric to jump out of the driver's side and was shot in both of his legs. The gunmen were driving a pickup truck and decided to put all 4 American road trippers inside their vehicle. The 3 men of the group had all been shot and were still alive, so they were hoisted onto the truck. Latavia was forced on by gunpoint. However, another person got caught in the crossfire. Arely Servando, a 33-year-old woman, was hit by one of the bullets while walking about a block and a half away. Upon hearing the gunshots, the state police arrived and pursued the truck, which led to an intense shootout. However, the cartel got away and had 4 innocent Americans with them. 10 to 15 minutes later, they were almost at the location the kidnappers wanted to bring them. The fact of the matter was that all 3 of them had been shot and needed treatment immediately. According to Eric, Shahid, who had been hit several times, said, "I love y'all, and I'm gone." He died right there. When they arrived at the house, gunmen were standing outside and waiting for them. They were wearing Diablo masks, and according to Eric, they were pointing the guns to our head, telling us not to look up. They were then taken to an unknown location and interrogated. You see, the Gulf Cartel runs the city of Matamoros, and this is a cartel not normally known for kidnapping tourists, especially Americans. They even have their own phrase, Calento la Plaza, which directly translates to heating the plaza, and refers to not drawing too much attention to their business. According to Irving Barrios, the Attorney General of Tamaulipas, this kidnapping was a misunderstanding. Some sources say that the cartel members thought they were rival smugglers. Because they were all African Americans, the cartel mistook them to be from the Caribbean country of Haiti. It would become abundantly clear to the kidnappers that these were just simple Americans on a road trip. They were interrogated again and again, but always kept getting the same answers. Finally, to help with their gun wounds, they agreed to take them to a clinic. The clinic For obvious reasons, they couldn't simply bring the hostages to a public hospital. Instead, they were brought to a clinic where they put William's leg on a 2x4 and stitched the leg. And when you are receiving treatment like this in a proper medical setting, you will be given some sort of anesthesia or pain relief. This luxury was not afforded to him, and to Eric's horror, later that day, all of those stitches burst out. But strangely enough, Zendel received little or no medical treatment. While they were trying to stitch up Eric's leg, Zendel was fighting for his life. Latavia was quick to point this out, and they were told that Zendel would be brought to a hospital soon. But within the hour, Zendel lost his battle and was now dead. The 4 hostages were now down to 2. It is not immediately clear why one was given medical treatment, while the other was apparently left to die. Perhaps they felt that they could treat Eric's leg, but Zendel at that moment might have been a lost cause. Things were looking bleak for the 2 remaining survivors. However, the glimmer of hope they had in the back of their mind was that their friend Cheryl Oren was still in the U.S., and she would be the first to notice that they were missing. The boys were expected to drop Latavia off for surgery and come straight back, so Cheryl would have expected them to drive back later in the day. What they didn't realize was that the road trip had really taken its toll on Cheryl, so when she returned to her motel, she treated herself to an afternoon nap. She told news outlets, "I was exhausted, from the long hours, from the long ride." And by the time she woke up, it was now 5 p.m., and her friends were nowhere to be seen. She went down to the hotel reception and asked the clerk if they had come back to the hotel, and his response was an ominous no. She called her boyfriend and Latavia's brother and told them that she felt that something was not right. She waited all evening and all night, but no answer. With all of this in mind, she reported them missing police. Meanwhile, the hostages were taken across multiple locations, which helped ensure that they were never found. Tamaulipas Governor Americo Villarreal said this was to create confusion and avoid rescue efforts. A rather grim detail is that the 2 dead victims were transported to all of these locations too. Latavia and Eric were regularly blindfolded, so it would be impossible to pinpoint where exactly they were. A viral video. While they were being held hostage, one of the gunmen was watching a video on his phone, which was incredibly loud and had the sound of gunshots. Latavia's ears perked up. These sounds were incredibly familiar, and she knew precisely when this video was filmed. In an interview with Anderson Cooper on CNN, she said,
"I could remember the gunshots, the noise, and I heard it. And I asked him, I said, 'Excuse me, is that us?' And he said, 'Yes.' I said, 'Can I see it?' And he's like, 'Hold on.' And he turned the phone around. And he showed a video of us being kidnapped and stuff like that.
This video on his phone was not a private video. It was on the internet. Knowing that what had happened to them was now out there on the internet, she still had glimmers of hope that they would be rescued. And this video was also seen by Cheryl. She came across it during the wee hours of Saturday night and had been missing since Friday morning. She finally had her answer as to what had happened to her friends. In a separate interview with Anderson Cooper, she said,
"I dropped the phone. My body clenched up. I dropped the phone. My stomach was in knots. And I just began praying."
The FBI was also involved and placed a $50,000 reward for their rescue. As the kidnapping went on, things took an even darker turn. They asked Latavia and Eric to have sex with each other. They explained to them that they were brother and sister, and Latavia was also pregnant too. It's not clear whether Latavia and Eric are biological siblings. This could have been used as an excuse for them not to engage in intercourse, or it could have been meant as a term for their strong friendship together. Throughout this horrifying ideal, one of the worst aspects of it was the uncertainty. How long were they expected to be kidnapped? And more importantly, would they ever get out alive? They were first taken on Friday, just before noon. However, it wasn't until the early hours of Tuesday morning that they were eventually found. They were found in a wooden house in Ejido El Tecolote, which is 6.2 miles from Matamoros. Latavia was still alive, but seen barefoot and covered in dirt with streaks of blood on her left leg. Eric was also thankfully found alive too.
2 U.S. citizens were returned to the United States. The bodies of 2 other U.S. citizens killed in the same incident.
The bodies of Zendel and Shaid were also found at the scene. One body was found inside the house, whereas another was found outside. They were both covered in sheets when found. Eric and Latavia were taken, and the remains of Zendel and Shaid were brought back to the U.S. too. The culprits. In the beginning, only one person was charged with this crime, the lookout.
A 24-year-old man identified only by his first name, Jose, arrested. Mexican authorities say he was in charge of watching the Americans.
According to her mother, Latavia has no significant injuries, and you can only imagine the relief she felt when her daughter returned alive.
I had hope. I was thinking his eyes. I said, "Thank you, Jesus. There is a God."
Eric's wife told the FBI that he had been shot twice in one leg and another time in the other. Like Latavia's mother, she was incredibly relieved too.
It was just tears of joy, I guess, that he's alive. I didn't want to imagine what he was going through, or, what any of them were going through.
When he appeared on Anderson Cooper's interview, Eric was unsurprisingly seen in a wheelchair. Mexico's President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador said, "We're very sorry to have this happen in our country, and we send our condolences to the families of the victims, their friends, to the people of the United States." The apology they were not expecting, however, came from the cartel. On March 10th, 5 cartel members were charged with aggravated kidnapping and murder. This was a day after the Gulf Cartel took responsibility for the kidnappings, and astonishingly left 5 of their men tied up near a pickup truck where they could be arrested. The plot thickened even further together when a curious note was left on the vehicle. The Gulf Cartel Grupo Escorpiones strongly condemns the events of Friday, March 3rd, in which unfortunately an innocent working mother died and 4 American citizens were kidnapped, of which 2 died. For this reason, we have decided to hand over those involved and directly responsible for the events, who at all times acted under their own determination and in discipline and against the rules in which the CDG has always operated. The statement read like a press release. The Gulf Cartel, after all, tries to work like any other business. Public relations. This statement makes more sense when you understand that cartels will often brand themselves as working for the community and will often blame senseless violence on rival cartels. This note is them explaining that these cartel members did not follow cartel rules and as such are being handed over to the police. Another theory is that the cartel, in hindsight, regretted these kidnappings and has since left these 5 cartel members as sacrificial lambs. The Wall Street Journal believes that there were not 5 but 15 people involved in the kidnapping. Alejandro Hope, an independent Mexico City security analyst and former intelligence official, said they are the scapegoats of the affair who the cartel gave up to deflect pressure. At best, it is a manipulation of the judicial process by the cartel, and at worst, it shows coexistence between prosecutors and criminal groups. Whatever the case, 3 innocent people were killed, and another 2 will be left traumatized for quite some time. It's hard to think we can achieve within Eric's cousin Jerry told news outlets. It ain't gonna change nothing about the suffering that we went through. And as I mentioned earlier, the Gulf Cartel will try to avoid the situation of Calento La Plaza, or heating up the place. And this situation has brought an incredible amount of heat to the Gulf Cartel. Apologies from the cartel were almost unheard of. Ricardo Ainsley, a professor at the University of Texas at Austin, said, "I've never heard of a cartel offering up an apology or turning over suspects. That's just not their MO. I suspect that because of the kidnappings, they're under extreme pressure, and not just from Mexican federal and state authorities. This is particularly bad news for the faction of the Gulf Cartel responsible. The cartels run their business like McDonald's and Burger King and will have different franchises or factions across the country. The faction responsible for this is the Scorpions faction of the Gulf Cartel, and it's possible that they could severely damage their relationship with their bosses." Mexican security analyst David Saucedo said, "It is very difficult right now for them to continue working in terms of street-level drug sales and transferring drugs to the United States. They are the first ones interested in closing this chapter as soon as possible." President Joe Biden has not personally spoken publicly about the killings. However, National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby said, "Attacks on U.S. citizens are unacceptable, no matter where, under what circumstances they occur. We're going to work closely with the Mexican government to ensure that justice is done in this case." The possible response. The most heated criticism from the U.S. has come from the Republican Party. Senator Lindsey Graham has been particularly vocal and said,
Drug cartels in Mexico have been terrorizing Americans for decades. We're going to unleash the fury and might of the United States against these cartels.
He clarified that he does not want the U.S. to simply invade Mexico.
The second step that we'll be engaging in is give the military the authority to go after these organizations wherever they exist. Not to invade Mexico, not to shoot Mexican airplanes down, but to destroy drug labs that are poisoning Americans.
Graham does make an interesting comparison between Mexican drug cartels and terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, where the U.S. has had no issues in directly targeting.
John and I believe that if there were an ISIS or Al-Qaeda cell in Mexico that lobbed a rocket into Texas, we'd wipe them off the planet. They're doing that times thousands, and our response is inadequate.
Mexico's president has hit back at these comments and said, "We are not a protectorate of the United States, nor a colony of the United States." President Biden has been criticized for his inaction, but his defenders pointed out that in early 2023, Biden signed an order which gave expanded authority to the Treasury Department to penalize cartels. Others have said that an attack by the U.S. military is simply presenting a simple solution to what is a highly complicated problem.
Every expert I've spoken to, Michael, saying that the idea that U.S. troops could solve a problem so deeply enmeshed in Mexican society, they're skeptical at best.
Nonetheless, the question of what to do about Mexico's cartels has been a heated debate in the U.S. for decades, and these kidnappings only added more fuel to the fire.